In early May, there was another declaration of independence in the former Soviet Union. The Crimean Peninsula had historically been Russian-speaking, but in 1954 Khrushchev had transferred it to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic for administrative purposes. As the Soviet Union fell apart in February 1991, greater autonomy was given to Crimea, making it an autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic within the Ukraine. Then, in February 1992, it had changed its name from the Crimean ASSR to simply the Republic of Crimea for obvious reasons, and in early May, its leaders declared Crimean independence from Ukraine and adopted a flag in the Russian red, white and blue colours instead of Ukrainian blue and yellow. There was an extra dimension to this declaration because the Crimean port of Sevastopol hosted what had once been the Soviet Black Sea Fleet, whose fate was still uncertain, with Russia claiming control and ownership as a successor to the USSR, while Ukraine was unwilling to leave Russian bases on its soil. With this issue still a live one, there didn't seem to be an appetite on either side to add a third player, an independent Crimea, to the mix, and when it became clear that neither Kiev nor Moscow supported independence, it was quietly withdrawn, and the Ukrainian parliament promised greater autonomy to the peninsula. On the island of Corsica, French football club SC Bastia were facing giants Olympique Marseille in the semi-final of the French Cup, and keen to make bank on this major event, the club erected a temporary stand. But it had all been done in a bit of a hurry and pushed through the planning stage without being looked at too closely. Corners were cut, and the stand collapsed before the game, killing 18 and injuring over 2,300. Investigations concluded that not only had the temporary stand been shoddily built, but the ticketing had also been badly managed, allowing too many fans into the new structure. The semi-final was abandoned, never played, and rather than crown Monaco the winners of the other semi-final, the Coupe de France would have no winner for the first time in its history. And over in England, Leeds United won their first title since 1974 and their third overall, becoming the last club to win the English First Division as the top flight. When English football reconvened in the summer, the top division would now be the independent Premier League, with the historic Football League now forming levels 2 through 4, albeit still numbered 1, 2 and 3 just to be confusing. In the days before the San Marino Grand Prix, there was a meeting almost unthinkable a few years earlier, as Ron Dennis was hosted at Maranello by Luca di Montezemolo. What could unite these two great rivals? The need to do something about Williams, of course. They agreed a position to take to FISA, namely that electronic aids such as traction control and active suspension were both sending the cost of F1 spiralling again and reducing the spectacle for fans. Max Mosley was sympathetic to the argument, and it was debated by the next FISA Commission, along with Bernie Ecclestone's idea to reintroduce refuelling to shake things up a bit. Perhaps understandably, team owners like Giancarlo Minardi were all in favour of banning technical aids and reducing costs, while Frank Williams was against it, saying it was worse than the Balestra era. In any case, refuelling would have to be shelved until at least 1994 to allow enough development lead-in time for chassis designers. What would go into the cars was also under debate, with FISA keen to have a single fuel formula and Elf, Shell, Total and BP all joining forces to oppose the idea and pool their chemical research. Mobil, supplying Benetton, were the outliers and supported FISA's idea. Build-up was underway for the Indy 500, and Nelson Piquet had a terrifying accident in practice, with both legs crushed, and he narrowly avoided losing them both. He was not alone. Pancho Carter and Hiro Matsushita both broke bones in crashes, and Filipino rookie Jovi Marcello was killed when he crashed head-on into the wall in a very similar accident to Piquet's. The 500 itself would take place in the week between the San Marino and Monaco Grand Prix, with no fewer than 10 past winners expected to be in the field. Piquet was visited in hospital by Alessandro Nannini, who joked about the driver Benetton would have had with my arms and your legs. It certainly put paid to rumours of Piquet joining Ferrari, but Ivan Capelli was still the subject of much unkind speculation about his future. The team were all pretty down in the dumps about their performance, rejecting a proposed new gearbox as not good enough, and considering that scoring points at Imola will be the best they could hope for. The Tifosi, of course, expect more, and have really taken Jean Alesi to their heart, seeing in him a worthy successor to Gilles Villeneuve in the way he drove the number 27 car. In the week of the 10th anniversary of the Canadian's death, this is particularly important, but Ferrari had only won twice at Imola, the infamous 1982 race won by Didier Pironi, and Patrick Tambay's win inherited from a crashing Riccardo Patrese the year after. On that occasion, Patrese had been hurt by his fellow Italians cheering his crash, and although he had put some of those demons to bed by winning here in 1990, he was still not a big fan of the place. Matters weren't helped when, in a private test a week before the race, a slow puncture sent him into the wall at Tamburello at 200 km an hour, 124 miles an hour. Fortunately, the puncture had also put him into a spin, and he hit the wall side-on, otherwise it could have been very nasty indeed. Instead, shaken but unhurt, he went off to spend the weekend with his family in Padua and hide from the press, who were increasingly questioning his performance in the Williams, something he himself was struggling with too. As for everyone else, the question seemed to be not whether Mansell and Williams would win the title this year, but whether they could go one better than McLaren in 1988 and win every single race. Just as on that occasion, their rivals were all struggling, though the new Benetton was looking good and would have an uprated engine here, while McLaren was still improving the MP47 and confident of at least being closer to Williams. Lotus had two of their new 107 chassis, a car reputedly based on the abandoned March 1992 design. It certainly looked like Chris Murphy's Leighton House of 1991, and it featured a system that Lotus described as fast ride height, a sort of semi-active suspension using conventional springs and dampers but with computer control to adjust ride height on the go. The team had been one of the pioneers of active suspension back in the 80s, but had never quite managed to make the system work the way that Williams evidently had for 1992. Just in case, though, the team had also brought two 102Ds with them. For a team that was living hand-to-mouth just a year earlier, they certainly looked like they were making a big comeback. Minardi also had two of their new cars at Imola, despite its teething troubles in Spain, and again had an old chassis available as a backup. And Brabham was still in financial trouble, now with John Judd saying he'd not been paid for his engines and they would be repossessed. A late agreement on Friday was made that they could use them this weekend, but the drivers were told to take care because they really couldn't afford to break one. So, off they all went for pre-qualifying, with Andrea Moda's new sporting director, Frédéric Desnaux, formerly of AGS, Colonia and Larousse, seeing his charges off. There had definitely been an improvement, as Roberto Marino put in some good times before his wheel bearing gave out. Unfortunately, Perry McCarthy had still never actually had a seat fitting, and his car hadn't got a windscreen attached, so he wasn't really able to get anywhere before his differential broke. But at least he had set a time. Michele Alboreto had the best of the session, leading Gasho, Katayama and Chiesa through as usual, but with all of them having had a range of technical issues, Moreno was just 0.4 seconds off putting the S192 through into qualifying proper. Maybe next time. It was the Mansell show again in qualifying, despite him suffering with hay fever, with Patrese over a second behind after a series of technical problems on Friday. He was still second though, as the grid took on a distinctly Noah's Ark appearance, 2x2. The McLarens took row 2, closer than last time but still with suspension issues. The Benettons on row 3 and disappointed to have gone backwards with the new engine. The Ferraris on row 4 after Alesi and Brundle had renewed hostilities in one session. 9th and 11th were the very impressive footworks of Alboreto and Suzuki, split by Bootson's Ligier, outqualifying Comas for a change in Ligier's 250th Grand Prix. Wendlinger continued punching above March's weight in 12th, ahead of the second Ligier. De Cesaris lined up 14th, and Gouillard would have done better than 20th if he hadn't had his best lap scratched off for a rear wing infringement. The Minardis were 21st and 25th, Belmondo qualified again, but the new Lotus proved something of a disaster, a series of blown engines leaving Hakkinen to watch the race from the pit wall, while Herbert dragged one of the spare 102Ds onto the very back of the grid. Mika would be joined in missing the race by Andrea Chiesa, who crashed heavily on Saturday, and the two Brabhams, neither driver permitted to push hard, and Hill having lost his Friday times due to an overweight car, but still beating Van der Poel. The Spanish Grand Prix attracted just 38,000 spectators. Imola, as usual, knocked that into a cocked hat, with 100,000 packing the stands on Sunday alone, despite Ferrari's setbacks. And unlike Spain, the weather was glorious, though track temperatures were very high, especially for May. So the question of the right rubber reared its head for the first time, with Goodyear bringing 2 compounds of tyres to the race. The Williams drivers both chose soft D compounds and planned to stop. Senna went for a combination, while Berger, always harder on tyres, fitted Cs all round, as did the Ferraris and Benettons. All were expecting Williams to motor off into the distance, so really their only chance at beating them was if Frank's boys muffed a pit stop, a not unknown event. On the way round to the grid, Stefano Modna's awful season continued as he noticed a vibration and came back in. The engine was examined and he ended up starting in the spare from the pit lane. With little to lose, Herbert had opted to start in the new 107 to at least give it a bit of a run out. They lined up for the start, but a pair of blue-clad arms started waving. Karl Wendlinger had stalled, so the start was put back 5 minutes while the march was dragged out of the way and sent off to start at the back. Unknown to most, this had saved Mansell's bacon, as his automatic clutch had failed to engage when he pulled up, and he would probably have gone nowhere at the start. As it was, the engineers fixed it, and away they all went for a second formation lap. If Mansell was nervous about his clutch, he needn't have been. When the lights went green, he got the perfect start once more and shot into Tamburello first, with Patrese and Senna going side by side through the corner. By the time they'd slowed for Tosa, Patrese had taken the place, with Brundle benefiting from a Schumacher-Berger clash to go fourth. So it was Williams-Williams, McLaren-Benetton, Ferrari, as they headed up the hill, with Capelli getting ahead of Alesi. Unseen at the back, Herbert and Wendlinger had bumped, and Johnny had to come in to have his steering arm replaced, which lost him 2 laps in the process. Alesi retook 7th going through Acqua Minerale, as Mansell was already pulling away, and Berger retook the place from Brundle at Rivazza to restore the symmetry before the end of lap 1. By the end of the lap, the Williams cars were already in a commanding lead over Senna and began to pull away at a rate of 2 seconds a lap. By lap 3, Mansell's lead over Patrese was 3.2 seconds already, with Senna 8 seconds behind Mansell. Schumacher was climbing all over the back of Brundle and getting a little impatient to get past his veteran teammate. In fact, a 4-car train of the McLarens and Benettons had soon formed as the Williamses stormed off into the distance. Christian Fittipaldi was the first casualty on the track with transmission failure, and a couple of laps later Johnny Herbert was touring, his own transmission having betrayed him, though as he'd been stationary for a while, he would actually go down on the list as the first retirement on the basis of distance travelled. And then on lap 12, a groan went up from the Tifosi as Ivan Capelli disappeared into the gravel trap in a cloud of dust, missed by the cameras that only just caught the aftermath. His brakes had seized up going into Acqua Minerale, which really isn't where you want your brakes to seize up, and while it was hardly his fault, this really wouldn't help his case with the fans. As the race approached 1/3 distance, the main battle on track was the entertaining intra-team battle between Schumacher and Brundle for 5th place, but already the first cars were beginning to stop for tyres. Modena on lap 15, Belmondo on lap 17, then Patrese was the first of the front-runners in on lap 19, an 8-second stop ensuring that he was out well ahead of Senna, who was struggling with an unstable car and was 20 seconds behind Riccardo already when he came in. While Patrese was in the pits, Schumacher made a rare error in his pursuit of Brundle, spinning off at Rivazza and bouncing off the tyre barriers. Getting going again, he came in for tyres and a quick check-over, but he'd bent his steering arm, and that had to be replaced. Suzuki, apparently getting vertigo up in the top 10, spun at the last corner but got moving again without too much drama, leaving his teammate Alboreto in 8th, fending off the Dallara twins as Mansell made his stop on lap 23, with a 26-second lead over Patrese. Mansell's pit stop was a second slower than Patrese's, but there was no rush, and he was still 4 seconds ahead when he regained the track, as Schumacher came in to retire, his rear suspension too suspect to continue. Patrese had one chance if he wanted to win. Mansell needed to warm up his tyres and was trying to lap Olivier Guillard, who seemed to have been making his life's work to get in Nigel's way at every opportunity. By the time he got through, Patrese had narrowed the gap to 2 seconds, but once Mansell was past the Tyrrell, he reasserted himself, setting a new fastest lap, and now, of course, it was Patrese's time to pass the Frenchman. Brundle was in on lap 25, Senna on lap 26, and Berger on lap 27, and once that had all shaken out, the Tifosi had something to be optimistic about, because at half distance, Alesi was now 3rd and planning to go non-stop, with a lead of about 4 seconds over Senna, with Berger and Brundle 5th and 6th, the latter 3 still running close together. Tarquini and Morbidelli had both in the meantime gone out with engine failures, and Modena with a gearbox failure. Mansell continued to go faster and faster, setting fastest laps and pulling away from Patrese, as Katayama's engine cover blew off around Tamburello, some of it ending up right in the middle of the track, until a suicidally brave Marshall ran out and got it. As if the team had accidentally hit the self-destruct button on both cars, Gasho's brakes also failed on the way up to Tosa and deposited him in the wall, though Katayama was at least still going. The two Dallaras were going at it hammer and tongs, 2 in 8th and 9th, with Martini fending off Leto, But before we'd had a chance to watch much of that, Senna was attacking a lazy who'd been held up by Guiar, with Berger right on his teammate's tail. Senna went through at Tosa, Berger followed but made contact, the resulting prang leaving bits of carbon fibre all over the track, and Berger's McLaren stranded on the racing line halfway up the hill. Again, brave marshalling work cleared both without needing to stop the race, but no points for Ferrari today. So at two-thirds distance, Manasell and Patrese now led Senna, with Brundle 4th, Alboreto 5th and Martini 6th, with Leto still right on his teammate's tail and the last unlapped driver. The marshals at Tosa weren't done yet, though, as Katayama's eventful day came to an end. A lap after the Berger lazy incident, the Japanese rookie spinning and stalling and nearly taking out Gugelmin, who'd been running 8th until he spun himself, avoiding action. Senna, for his part, was really suffering in the cockpit, the high temperatures combining with the work he was having to put in to wrestle the McLaren round the track, and he'd dropped back to nearly a minute behind Manasell. 9 laps to go, and Guiar got another chance to take Manasell out, but Patrese wasn't able to capitalise, as he was himself stuck behind Comas and Alboreto and was 20 seconds back. All that could stop Manasell now was the cramp in his right leg that started making itself known with 3 laps to go, while Brundle was reeling in a fading Senna. Manasell came in to take his 5th successive win, the first man ever to win the first 5 races of a season, and the first since Jim Clark in 1965 to win 5 in a row at all, with normal service resumed as Patrese made it to Williams 1-2. Senna made it home 3rd, but was in such bad shape that Sid Watkins and personal physician Josef Leberer had to help him out of the car and choppered him off to hospital in Bologna with dehydration and heat exhaustion. Martin Brundle was a delighted 4th to take his first finish and first points for Benetton, having convincingly beaten Schumacher in a straight fight, and Alboreto and Martini repeated their finish from last time of 5th and 6th. The single point for Dallara Ferrari, the only thing that the prancing horse would be getting from this meeting, aside from another kicking in the press. Though the few Tifosi that hadn't already left the track did give former Ferrari favourite Alboreto a rousing reception when he came home 5th. JJ Leto had lost his engine in the closing stages, dropping down to a still classified 11th ahead of the 2 March cars, chalking up another pair of finishes, even if they never seemed to go quite as fast in the race as Wendlinger could make it go in qualifying. As the teams looked forward to the Monaco Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time, it looked very much like the championships were both sewn up already, with Manasell having over double the points of his nearest rival, and Williams more than triple of theirs. Senna and Berger thought so, certainly, both saying that they just couldn't see a way to catch up, and that at this stage they thought the MP47 was about as good as it was going to get.